We're very lucky to have with us a computer science guru. He is the guy who's basically started file sharing. Bram Cohen is essentially the guy who created BitTorrent and has become very famous for that. And we'd love to hear his experience as an entrepreneur transitioning from school directly into entrepreneurship. So welcome, Bram.
I feel a little silly talking to students because I actually dropped out of a state school myself. What I did after that was I went and worked at a bunch of startups that you haven't heard of because they all failed. And got a lot of experience kind of at the School of Hard Knocks. When you're in school, it seems like life is planned out for you. This is what you do here, this is what you do there, this is what's happening in the future. This is how your life is going to go. And if you're doing anything entrepreneurial, it doesn't work that way at all. Whatever you've accomplished in the past, whatever qualifications you have, yada, 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 if you're doing your own company, none of those things matter whatsoever. What matters is whether your current venture succeeds. The things that matter for your current venture succeeding, it sounds like kind of tautological, are its own success. People's impressions of how great you are, their impressions of how hard you work, all those things really have very little bearing on how well you do. And that's why when people talk about working late nights, it always makes me cringe. I'm really big on not having sleep deprivation, personally. Which is not to say that one shouldn't work a lot, but making sure that you're putting on the show of working constantly and hence not getting enough sleep and hence not being functional, not a good thing to do. It impresses your boss when you have a real job, but when you're working for yourself, really not such a great idea. So my experience creating BitTorrent was, I worked at, like I said, a couple of startups you've never heard of. They all went under. But I had a lot of experience in networking. Turns out layer 5 networking is a very weird, specialized field that nobody knows much of anything about how to work in it. And I've been doing it for a while. So the last place I was at, I had a bunch, I'd done some work that I thought was good, and I had a bunch of ideas on how to prove it. I thought everything that I'd done at the last job that was good needed to be totally redone because it had all kinds of problems. But I thought there was an opportunity somewhere. And the first thing you always should do when thinking about a business to start is figure out how you're going to create value. Which is different from saying, oh, how am I going to make a lot of money or anything like that. It's how do I create value? How do I do something that's going to make a material impact in somebody's life for the better? Either like a small impact in a huge number of people or a very big impact for a small number of people. But you should always go, what is this thing that I'm doing? What is it actually going to accomplish? And like I personally could never work at a company like, say, Groupon. Maybe I could found a company like Groupon because they had different plans when they started. But something like that, fundamentally, it seems to me, it's a play for making money. It's a ploy. It might make money, but it doesn't really create value in any way. If it disappeared off the face of the earth, whatever. Not going to make a very big difference there. With BitTorrent, I had these ideas for something that I thought could be good, could really make a difference in the world. And so I started working on it. Now, something that's changed a lot in the Bay Area in the last 10 years is that companies these days are really very product focused. Back then, there was a lot more technology focused companies. And I really can't blame people for making the shift. When I created BitTorrent, what I was trying to do, it wasn't clear that it was possible. It wasn't clear that there was big market pull for it, but mostly nobody had any idea how to do it. And so I lived off of savings for a while, and then credit cards, and stuff like that. And after 2 years, it actually started getting significant real-world adoption. And then I did some contract work, yada, 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 and then I actually raised some money. And that was this like very long process of really being committed to, I think this can work. On paper, it looks to me like this really makes sense, so I'm going to stick with it until I get it going. And that required that I have a pretty deep understanding of the technology and a willingness to see it through until it bore fruition. And that's not popular to do these days because it's very risky, but it's something which I really wish more people would do.
Great, thank you. Great. We have time if anyone has a question or two for Bram.
Yes?
How do you make money off of BitTorrent?
How do I make money off of BitTorrent? Oh, that's the next question. Well, you take 0 and you multiply it by infinity, and it ends up to real money.
That's a robot model.
Yeah, well, I answered this question on Quora, and everyone thought it was hilarious because I answered it. I said, even crappy monetization works when you have more users than Twitter. Because we have a lot more users than Twitter, actually. We push out a toolbar right now. It comes with our client. It's an optional install. And that makes some money for us. It's really not very good monetization. We're working on much better monetization, but that's what we do for now, and we have so many users that we can't stop being profitable, just based off of that. So I've been trying to scale up to not be quite so profitable anymore, because it's really been keeping pace with user base. So.
Who's your mentor? Who's your mentor for Layer 5 networking?
Oh, geez.
And how'd you meet him?
Nobody knows much of anything about Layer 5 networking. The closest I could say is Jim Gray, although I never met him. He's unfortunately gone now. But he wrote a book called Transaction Processing. It's this big, thick, black book, which is really a classic in databases, but it actually teaches you a lot more about databases because it teaches you about reliable systems. Reliable systems have a very, very specific meaning in computers, which is that not that they have a low failure rate. There are reliable systems that have high failure rates, there are unreliable systems that have low failure rates, although you try to make the reliability help. A reliable system is something that has failover in it, that something might fail and your system does something about it. And most programmers try and work on these things, it just completely breaks their brain. They just can't deal. Like, what do you mean I can't call a function and know that it's going to work? It astounds me the way living biological systems work. It's all I can do to make just one layer have to have reliability on it. And I do it by making these painstaking state machines, which are extremely hard to debug. But that book kind of explains the basics of how to think about things that might fail and deal with it. And when you're dealing with Layer 5 networking, everything might fail. Just packets go away, peers die, they send weird, garbled stuff. It's just a horrible. Oh, and you don't know what anyone's throughput rates are, and there's weird latencies, and who knows what's going on, and you just got to deal with it.
All right.
Oh, yeah. One question?
Yeah, one more question.
So, I guess putting myself in your shoes, when you're trying to do something that you didn't know could be done, it's never been done before.
No, I did know it could be done, but other people didn't really believe me.
Oh, okay. Well, so I was just thinking, like, maybe, I don't know, you said 2 years in when you're, like, living off of credit cards, I think you said at one point.
Yeah.
Was there a point where you were thinking, should I keep going or should I just turn around?
No, but I'm told I'm crazy. I don't know. I don't get anxiety the way normal people do.
You do or you do not get
I do not get anxiety.
How do you deal with that?
I'm told I'm really not missing out on anything, not having much anxiety. I actually, along the way, I was making real progress towards where I was going, and I couldn't really explain it to anyone else very well, what the progress was or why I was doing things the way it was. Like, right now, I've been working on peer-to-peer live streaming for like the last 3 years. We're actually doing some in the wild deployments of that now, and that's another thing. That's an actually even more ambitious project. It's one of these things where, okay, I'm going to go in my cave and work on this for a long time on this problem which no one else has made any real progress in, and I'm going to do it better than anybody else. there are specific things you can do here. You can write it into separate modules. You can, well, obviously you can analyze asymptotics about the algorithms as a whole that you're using. Although that's very hard to think about in reliable systems, you can cut it up into separate modules that you can test individually. You can start doing deployments. For the thing I've been working on for the last couple of years, I actually have an emulator, which does a reasonable job of emulating the way the real internet works. And so I can run my entire system in there. I can like spin up 100 peers under conditions that I'm able to specify very, very precisely, and then just run it and see how it goes. And if there's a problem, if there appears to be a bug, even if the effects of the bug are emergent, I have it set up so that I can literally run the exact same trial again with no real time delays. So it runs it, you know, running 100 peers runs at about real time. So an individual peer would take 1% CPU if it was running in real time on the machine. And then I can add diagnostics and stuff to it. So there are ways you can kind of get a better handle on what you're doing. Like if I didn't have good test setups and ways of studying what I'm doing, I'd have failed miserably by now. But mostly it's kind of the engineer's approach to the world, right? Where you look at a power plant and most people see just the shapes of the buildings and stuff. And that's not really very enlightening when you're trying to think about how a power plant works. A power plant is really based on thermodynamic cycles. If you don't know anything about thermodynamic cycles, you're never going to understand much of anything useful about what a power plant is doing. And that's kind of how you have to think about things. If you're going to go, well, I think this is going to work, it works on paper, therefore hashing out the details is just a matter of logistics, and that's doable.
All right, thanks, Graham.